Welcome back to the Mojo podcast with me, Richard Stokes. And I just wanted to start off this week by thanking you for your reactions to the podcast so far. I mean, really amazing feedback, especially from last week with my guest, Carrie Montgomery. Lots of comment about how inspiring and honest and truthful her story was. So thank you so much for that. And indeed, I want to thank all my guests for their honest and inspiring stories so far. And it's great to see the Mojo podcast has regular listeners from all over the world. Lots of different people tuning in every week. So the UK, Spain and the US are the top 3 countries, but also lots of listeners in Australia, Belgium, Ireland, Singapore, Sweden, Dubai and the Netherlands, and that's just from the top 10 of what I can see. So it's really gratifying to have you tuning in and listening. And this little tour around the world is very apt for this week's guest and the theme of finding calm in a storm. Richard Bellars is a true traveller, leading expeditions and going on adventures and doing great work all over the world. He's been in actual storms and he's helped people find their way out of their own personal storms. Richard supports evolving leadership through facilitation, coaching and mentoring. For more than a decade, he has delivered experiential learning and social change programs in the UK, Europe, Africa and Middle East, across a broad spectrum of social entrepreneurs, women in business, leaders in conservation, and for injured veterans in transition. His experience is rich and creates incredible wisdom, which is amazing by itself, but what makes it wonderful is how generous Richard is with his wisdom. This episode is full of gems of ideas, learning and techniques, which Richard has done the hard yards in finding out, then done the work on himself and with his clients, and organisations like the military veterans charity Help for Heroes. In this episode, we talk about the magical, magnetic nature of Mojo and how to find calm by better understanding your own emotional regulatory system. For fans of a model, there's a brilliant one coming up, and he uses this with veterans with PTSD. Okay, so we're not in a war zone, but we are dealing with shock and grief right now, so I hope you'll find that model particularly useful. We also talk about leadership, as Richard has just contributed to a book on leadership during COVID-19. Details of that in the show notes, and he shares his perspective on what leadership means right now and how we can all take responsibility to lead ourselves and to lead those around us who perhaps need a more calming influence. So yes, it's all very topical. This episode is a little longer than my usual, but the wisdom keeps on coming all the way to the end, so please do stay plugged in right until the bitter end for a brilliant anti-procrastination tip that Richard shares. Please do enjoy the episode and remember to subscribe for new episodes every week, leave a 5-star rating and that all-important Apple Podcast review. Okay, over to the episode. So welcome back to the Mojo podcast, another of the isolation series, as I'm now kind of informally calling it, during the Great Pause. And, you know, one of the wonderful things about this time, and I hope we can look back despite all the difficulty and the grief, is that it is a wonderful time in that relationships are forming all the time. And I'm forming relationships with people I've never even met before or in real life. And my guest today is one of those. I'll introduce Richard in a second. But we have people in common, we have places in common. So I was introduced to Richard by Kirsty, who you'll remember from episode 6. He's also a great friend of Barry from episode 11. And Richard does lots of work in Kenya, which is actually where I was born. So when we spoke on the phone a couple of months ago, I think we had a very instant connection, but yet still to meet face to face, which hopefully after the Great Pause, we will be able to do. So hello, Richard, and how are you?
Good morning, Richard. Thank you for that. I'm well, thank you. I'm well. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. You know, the sort of the ups and downs of this time we're in. But what I'd love to get a sense from you, Richard, just to confuse everyone, there's 2 Richards on this particular podcast. Richard, how is your mojo today?
Today, it's a 7. Well, it's building. It's building. I'm talking to you. I'm getting ready for this. It's probably bringing it up to an 8. But to be honest, it was a 7 certainly this morning.
Mm. And have you found that kind of oscillation of mojo over the last few weeks?
I have. It hasn't been like, today. I've been feeling pretty great, pretty epic actually. And I've been sort of going, whoa, what's going on? Why, why so good? And I think that with the contrast this morning, when I was just not feeling that, caught me a bit by surprise. But it reminds me that we are emotional and sort of transient, and that things change, things go in waves. Just feeling a bit weird. Friend of mine who she's a global leader in sustainability, and she's calling this time the weirding, because it's like
Mm.
there's the old normal's gone. Whatever the new normal is going to be hasn't arrived yet, and we're sort of in this in between space. And so I'm feeling a bit weird in the weirding, but overall good.
Good, good. And, and thanks for that reflection on, it maybe the day starting not so good, but you just having that sense of, it will change. I am going to feel better, and I might feel worse in a couple of days' time, but just knowing that you're going to come back to a good place is probably quite comforting.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. So having a perspective, certainly, and not getting latched onto any one moment or any one event or any one trigger being the sort of be all and the end all. Um, Strong mojo or low mojo. It's actually, it is variable. I think for me, what's important is not to hang on to it, hang on to any one state at a time, but to consciously nourish what I do want and consciously let go what I don't.
Great. So, I'd love to get into a bit of that, kind of how you're doing that, maybe secondly. But first, can you give me a bit of a sense of, for you, how do you define mojo?
Wow. See, I wasn't sure about this because I actually generally wasn't sure because I know how it gets used. So I'm a linguist amongst other things, and so I went and looked it up. And mojo, uh, actually, in its derivation, means magic, and that really hit a sweet spot for me, because I think for me, for my experience of mojo, is when I'm sort of plugged into life. There's this energy coursing through me. I don't know where it's coming from, where it's going. It's just like, you feel electric and magnetic at the same time, completely present. I mean, this is at its very best, and it's like everything feels possible, but there's also nowhere else to go other than this moment. Just plugged into life. Um,
Mm.
so that's how I experience mojo. Yeah.
I love that definition. I was aware of some of that, but the way you expressed it was just beautiful. So thank you. And I guess in that you've almost started to perhaps answer how you manage or work on your mojo. If you know that what that state's like when you've got this electric magnetic energy that you're talking about. I love that both those forces there that are going on. So what are you doing to work on your mojo?
Um, it's you've heard me use the word already, nourishing, energy. So I do believe that I believe it, and I have the experience of it, that we are part of nature. We're not apart from nature, even though we've created these certain systems of separation. Actually, we're not. Everything is connected, and we're finding that out individually and now collectively. We're finding out that everything is interconnected. So when I do things that help me to nurture that connection, the mojo dials up. When I get distracted from that, you know, sense of mindfulness, and I create, I suppose I'm also nurturing something else. I'm nurturing the illusion of separation. I'm nurturing that I'm disconnected. I'm doing things that aren't good for me in mind, body, and spirit. Then, yeah, the mojo dials down. So, um, and that could be anything. It's really extrapolate for me anyway. The practice, and it is a practice, is to do that in any moment on any day. Is like with whatever's happening. It's like it doesn't have to be doing purposeful work that you're passionate about. Or obviously, that's amazing. It could be making a cup of tea because that's what you really feel like doing in that moment, and being mindful about it. You can be mindful. I don't know. I planted some potatoes recently, and I just loved it. I just felt my mojo was right on planting potatoes because it just felt
Mm.
earthy and grounded, and that I was growing something that then nurture my body. It was a fabulous feeling, and it wasn't. You know what I mean? It wasn't going out there changing the world.
Well, I love that. That's almost this sort of future investment, because the act of planting something, it's not an immediate
Mm,
return, as a lot of life is about immediate returns, isn't it? We've come to expect, and we're all, I guess, learning to slow down. But that sense of I do this right now, I get pleasure now, and in time, as you say, it'll literally feed you in the months to come. I love that.
nice. Well, thanks for playing that back. So then that's a great analogy for everything else. Um, so is what I'm reading, are my relationships, is the work I'm doing. Are these things that nurture me? Are these things that I can invest in for now and for the future? And or is it not? Am I doing something? And what I find interesting, and I've been listening to some of the other podcasts as well, which thank you for doing them because they're fabulous. It's I think listening to your other speakers that there have been certain points where they realised they were investing into something that maybe was great for them at a certain point, but something changed. They'd moved into a different context or a different cycle in their life, or a different aspects of their values and needs were asking for replenishment, and change happens. It's been said that the only constant is change. So
Mm.
it's not, at the same time, for me, there's something that maybe used to work doesn't necessarily work today or next month. So it's in each moment what's working, what's nourishing me this moment.
And on that area, we, again, one of the many, wonderful things that is coming out of this moment, this great pause, this weirding, are these coming togethers virtually, and people are giving a lot of their time generously. And I'll refer again to Kirsty, who runs a school of facilitation, who's doing a weekly get together for people like you and me and other facilitators and coaches. And you spoke during one of those get togethers recently, and I'd really love to get into a bit of what you spoke on around this the compassionate mind in this three circle model,
Okay.
because I just feel it's something that when you went through it, and I hope the listeners have this benefit now as well, I just felt very calmed and reassured as you spelt this out. So because of the kind of, there's so many things that, I always have a theme for the podcast, and we've talked, and there's lots of directions we could go in, Richard and I, today, but we want to talk about having or finding calm in this storm that we're in. And I know you've literally been in some storms as well, which hopefully we're going to get to as well. But I'd love to start off unpacking that model, because I know it's going to have value for listeners. Would you mind doing that?
Absolutely. For a bit of context, this comes from Paul Gilbert, emotional regulation system or emotional regulatory system, and we use it. It was taught to me to use in some of the work I do at Help for Heroes in the UK. So
Mm.
this is working with wounded, injured, and sick veterans to help them transition from where they are today into a more meaningful and independent life. You can probably imagine a number of very complex issues, and um, what I think, though most of what I come across with veterans is the extremes of what some humans go through. The principles of it are actually the same. So if you imagine you're a veteran and you've just gone through a major injury, and everything has been stripped away, you're left with the shock and grief of that. What's happening today in the world? There's been massive shock and massive grief of things that have been lost, you know, and those things could be loved ones, but they could be livelihoods. They could be, forms of income. They could be you know, the small daily ways of life that we were used to. So, we're all going through this shock and grief. So this emotional regulatory system is aimed at helping you recognize what your system is doing and how you can support it to rebalance. Okay, so that's the purpose of it. I'll try and describe it as simply as I can. Imagine you've got 3 circles. You've got a red one called threat, a blue one called drive, and a green one called soothe. Okay, these are all sort of major. These all represent major brain functions. Okay, and they're all designed to keep us to work together, to keep us alive, and to keep us healthy. Okay, that's their design. And when you get into it, you do start to realize how amazing the sort of human system really is when we nourish it and when we don't toxify it. So threat is, it's the part of us that says that's scanning for threat with the amygdala and saying, here's a problem. Okay, now this doesn't have to be extreme. This doesn't have to be saber-toothed tiger, jumping out of the trees.
Because we don't live on the plains of the Serengeti anymore, as most of us. We're in cities and urbanizations, and yes.
Although what I'll say in passing is what is interesting is the brain function doesn't actually know the difference between physical threat and emotional threat. And it doesn't know the difference between what's actually happening and what's imagined. So if we think it's a threat, we will process it as a threat.
Yes, it's that perception.
Exactly. It's perception. So I mean, already that's sort of changing things. It's like, am I really under threat here, or am I just having a response that feels like it? But threat could be, I need to drink some water. I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. I'm tired. Right. So basic survival needs. So
helpful threat in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, it's keeping you alive, and a lot of this has helped me because I would judge myself for thinking, feeling, and behaving in certain ways.
Right.
For me, this helps normalize things and go, actually, you don't need to judge yourself. You're just being a human being. So that's the function of the threat. The drive is the brain function that's about doing stuff, taking action, accomplishment. It's purposeful. It's definitely, it wants to do things, make things happen, see a result. Okay, so that's our drive to work, as in our drive to do work. That's also our drive to compete. That's our drive to have status, to be creating something with our lives. So does this make sense so far?
Completely. And I was just reflecting. So one thing for listeners' benefit, I am going to share a link so you can see this diagram that Richard is now drawing in your mind, these 3 circles, because that will really help afterwards. But I was just reflecting. I suppose the drive system, it's where in our modern lives we probably spend an awful lot of time, do we?
Yes. And we'll be in drive a lot because of perceived threats. So competition. So that could be competition with others, right? And now you can have healthy competition, but you could also have unhealthy competition. But it could also be unhealthy competition with yourself. So let's say if you have a perfectionist streak, right, that can actually trigger your threat. It's like, if this isn't perfect, or hell breaks loose within your, I haven't, with it, you create stress and anxiety. But mainly in our modern society, there's a lot of emphasis on threat and drive, consciously and unconsciously. And that's where we tend to oscillate. Threat, drive. I haven't done enough. I should do more. Should do more. Threat, drive, do more. Haven't done enough. Back to threat. Do more. Drive. Haven't done enough. Back to threat. Yeah. See how it works?
exhausting. It sounds exhausting, and you know it's
Oh,
exhausting
I
when
feel
you've
exhausting
experienced that.
describing it. I feel exhausting.
Yeah, exactly. And that state you were just describing, that I was in that about 3 weeks ago, quite early on, I suppose, in COVID-19, because I just had this sense of, lots of businesses obviously stopped. When you're self-employed, that has a big financial impact. And I'm not making impact. I'm not getting enough done. And I really wound myself up for about 3 days, very negatively,
Mm.
and then managed to, as you reflected on earlier, just sort of understood, I guess, what was going on, and talked myself out into perhaps where you're going to go next,
Yes, let's go there.
a
So,
calmer place.
yeah, so the soothe is the function that effectively rebalances the other two. So the three of
Mm,
them then work together on a. So you imagine. I think the analogy I used before. You imagine a zebra drinking at the water hole. Lion jumps out. Threat happens. So all the all the blood sort of goes to the limbs. Fight and flight. Off you go. Run,
mm,
drive. Run away, run away. And then at some point, zebra outruns the lion. Safe again. There's no threat. Okay, but it's still got all that blood pumping through its system, all that adrenaline coursing through the system,
mm,
and so that needs to rebalance. If we were on, so something here about hormones as well, because we really are sort of mammals. So the threat is driven by cortisol in the system. Cortisol is what puts us on alert. Okay,
yes.
when the threat is heightened, adrenaline kicks in. That's the sort of the turbocharge. Okay,
Mm,
that releases serotonin and endorphins for the drive stuff to happen. Okay, this
yeah.
is what we feel. For those of us who like to do exercise, it's like there's the healthy side of
Yeah. Yeah.
serotonin and endorphins. But after that's happened, if we stayed just doing cortisol, adrenaline, and serotonin, or certainly cortisol and adrenaline, then we would fry ourselves. It was described to me as adrenaline gives VIP access to cortisol to reach the whole body. So our whole body would be on hyper alert all the time, and this is what happens.
Oh, it
This is what happens in the.
floods you with that cortisol.
That's right, and this is what happens,
Right.
for example, with PTSD. That reset never quite happens, or doesn't happen very much.
Yeah.
So the system continues to be flooded with cortisol. It can happen in normal life if you only listen to the news, right? We get this drip, drip, drip of cortisol, and then if we turn over to I don't know, some advert that's telling you your life isn't good enough unless you drink this or wear that or buy such and such, it's still the same thing. It's still cortisol dripping into the system. So when you go to soothe, when the zebra goes to soothe, it's rebalancing. It's releasing. So it's oxytocin into the system, which
Right.
reduces oxytocin, reduces stress. So and you'll see, when the zebra shakes its skin. You've seen that when it sort of shakes, sort of like it's after a
Oh, yeah.
prepping
Yeah.
situation. Yeah, that's doing that reset.
Right. So it's getting rid of the stress hormones, and it's bringing in the love hormone of oxytocin in that process.
That's it. So
Wow.
the soothe function is doing those things. It's doing what will bring, um, like you say, oxytocin into the system. So it's doing things that are good for you, doing things that are nurturing, that are compassionate, that are caring, that are loving, that are slowing down the system rather than speeding it up. Um, so there's a whole range of different things. I mean, there's probably things that you do to actually
Mm,
calming yourself down. Um,
yeah. Meditation, probably one
yeah,
of the main ones.
yeah,
As a daily practice, finding that very calming, very centering, especially now, but always. And I think I'm just so grateful to have that practice as something I've been doing for a few years, because it's really helping.
yeah. So and friends and colleagues of mine, soothe isn't always a word that works for everyone, but some
Mm,
people like to call it active recovery. But breathing out longer than you breathe in, is a form of active recovery. When people say take a breath, what we should really say is take a breath out. Breath in is preparing you for action. Breath out is calming you down.
Wonderful. Well, I was going to say, because I know you do lots of amazing work. You mentioned it briefly with Help for Heroes. But I guess if you and as a linguist, if you're using that kind of language like soothe, does that not sometimes sit so well with these folks who've been on the front lines?
They are not used to the process of soothing in the military, and it's designed by purpose. It's more one of the ways you can soothe as a function is to care for others. It's to have empathy. It's to have compassion. So the way they use that in the military setting is look after your buddy, right?
Right.
But it's drilled into them: look after your buddy before you look after yourself. And if you think about it, that's designed for purpose, because if you actually took care of yourself, you wouldn't necessarily be trained for running into conflict situations. So there's a design to it, and we won't go into that too much now. But they're having to build this muscle of taking care of themselves, and it's a foreign concept to them. So conceptually, it can be difficult to grasp. The language soothe doesn't always land with them. But once they get the concept of it, once they get, and more importantly, practice of it, which means try something out and go, do you know what, that really works. So you'd be amazed at how many veterans think, yoga, you what? And then they try maybe yin yoga, for example, and have the best night's sleep they've had in years. And they go, wow, that works. And once something works, they don't care what it's called. They just use it.
Yeah, really practical attitude to it. Just, this is working for me. More of this, please.
Right. And so soothing can be really practical. It can be walk the dog, it can be keep your stuff tidy. It can be fresh air, just daily fresh air. Make your bed, get outside, do something that's just simple and good for you. Eat well. I think one of the key ones around soothe is, how do you speak to yourself? Speak kindly to yourself. The unconscious. If you say to the unconscious, "Oh, you're such an idiot," then what it is I'm an idiot. So be very mindful of how we speak to ourselves. It's a crucial one. Time for soothing. And for those who really struggle, though, I think this is why meditation is a good one, because you can bring a bit of structure to your soothe. But I can tell you from experience, when it doesn't work is when you go, right, I've got to do my soothing in the next 20 minutes. This is what can happen with physical activity. People go, right, I'm gonna do my soothe and go for a bike ride, and then they find themselves trying to beat their previous time on Strava or something. So, you know what I mean? I think you and Barry spoke about
Completely.
this.
We did a couple of episodes ago. Barry is completely convinced me to ditch Strava. We're talking about we just measure ourselves far too much, and measure to compare, essentially, and that comparison leads you to not perhaps enjoying the moment that you're in, because you're thinking about someone else who was on this road. If you're a cyclist, or a trail, if you're a runner. And I just love that clarity of thought. Why do I need to measure this? It's about enjoying. Cycling for me is somewhere between soothe and drive, but I prefer it to be more towards soothe, I guess. And when you're in some element of competition, it's definitely within. It feels more driven, which might even put you into threat.
Well, this is what I love about this model, is just use it organically. It's not one is better than the other. It's really about noticing. So when the circles get larger, when you need to build them up, when you need to maybe pull them back a bit. A mentor of mine said to me once, when a measure becomes a target, it's no longer a measure. So I think we can measure things in the sense of monitor, like checking in with yourself. Where am I today? Where is my threat? Where is my drive? Where is my soothe? And where do I need some balance? But if that measurement or monitoring or check-in becomes a target of, it should be more like this, then it changes the dynamic, because you've suddenly gone into the compete and compare.
What is innate within us that we are comparing ourselves? Is it does it go back to the threat system? Because if I'm not doing something, someone else will be. Is it a sense of a lack of abundance, a scarcity? Why do we compare?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I couldn't claim to have all the answers. As far as I've got, there's this, there is the what's our nature and what's our nurture. So what are we born with and what's our experience, sort of taught experience. So in terms of nature, yeah, we have this threat, drive, soothe systems. But isn't it interesting that what one person finds threatening, another person doesn't? So, but yeah, ultimately it would have been around survival. It would have been survival of the fittest, etc., etc. So you needed to be better than the next person. Is that relevant in today's society? I would, it's a personal point of view, but I would say competition gets in the way of collaboration. We need more in the world right now. I mean, competition serves a purpose, right? And it has served a purpose to really drive certain advancements. I was going to say progress, but it doesn't really feel to me like progress. But certain advancements, shall we say. But if it's been at the expense of collaboration, which is also, that's definitely part of the soothe, is how do I look after myself and those around me, then it's counteractive, I would say.
Yeah. So that on that kind of area, I know you've been doing. So you do lots of work. You mentioned Help for Heroes. I know you mentor all over the world, and you do lots with leaders and around leadership. And I believe you've been writing or collaborating on a book on that very subject. During these unprecedented times that we're in. So what, and relating to what we just talked about, in terms of your reflections on leadership right now, what's going on? Where can we find good leadership? What does it mean? Has it changed? Sorry, that's about 5 questions in there, Richard. That is so uncoachy of me to unpack 5 questions on a person I'm working with. But I just got into a bit of a flow.
It's awesome. I can feel my mojo is on the rise. Where to start? Well, I'll tell you what. To answer those questions, I would, because I'm often asking myself those questions, and what I find I need to do is just come back to, feet on the ground, possibly head in the clouds and hand on my heart, and go, well, where am I? Because whatever I want to express, share, put out into the world, I want it to come from a place of truth and sincerity for me, which ultimately, each of us has our own truth, because at that level, truth is subjective. And then I don't know, what I think is if when people are in alignment and authenticity with themselves, that carries a certain frequency, that carries a certain vibration, and ultimately that's what we resonate with. That's what we we're all these sort of transmitters and receivers picking up on each other's vibration. They even call it emotional contagion. That's the concept of how we pick up mood and emotion from each other. But it's also what we transmit. So when you're aware of it, you go, well, what am I putting out there? What am I transmitting? What am I sharing? Either but not just in my actions and behaviors, but in my thoughts and my moods and my intention. So the invisible stuff, it's still out there as a frequency. So how we show up is just, for me, it's vital. And I mean that in the sense of it's alive, as well as important. And it's happening anyway. So my approach to leadership is, what is your self-awareness of what you're showing up with? Is it what you want it to be? Is it having the impact you want? Is it having the influence you want? So that's partly answered your question, because that's my starting point. My starting point is to come back to self. It's also because I believe I'm the creator of my own experience, right? And then what I think, if you start with that individually, and then you start to collaborate with others who also believe that we are the creators of our experience, suddenly you realize, hang on, we can change this. we can change what we were experiencing into something else. We can co-create a new experience. And we can I mean, this is my belief and my hope for what is possible in life generally, but especially through this, is that from the chaos will come cohesion. Because look at nature. That's what happens in nature. You can get limited on focusing on one thing and call it chaos, like the caterpillar sort of effectively dying and turning into a cocoon. Or you can see it as cohesion, as it is what's the word? Not recalibrated, but realigned. All its atoms are realigned, and then it emerges as something else. I mean, that's transformation.
I think for me, there's a couple of wonderful things. Well, there's lots of wonderful things in there, but I'm picking up a lot about responsibility and kind of a personal responsibility to exactly what you're emitting, exactly the vibrations you're giving off, understanding where you are, and also that I work as a lot of coaches do about, we talk about control and influence and what you can control and what you can't. And actually, there's probably a little bit more when you think about it in the way that you're eloquently describing it. You're probably in a little bit more control than you think you are of a situation like this. Is that fair?
Control's an interesting one. I absolutely get your point in terms of what is in my circle of control and what's out of it, because we can so go into threat and drive for things that aren't in our control, and really all that's doing, going back to the model, is if you stay in threat and drive too much, you drain, you deflate, you can disconnect, you can even become depressed because you're just exhausted, you're just burnt out. So coming back to what can I do, and use the word responsibility, what is my responsibility? So what is my ability to respond?
Yes.
I think is core.
Moving slightly on, or slightly back in a way, because I know when we spoke initially on the phone a while ago, and you talked about multi-hyphenate, might not be the right way of putting it, but the multidisciplinary life that you've led. And you've done so many things in so many different parts of the world. And we're just, I guess we're talking about a few of those right now. But I'm just interested to understand when you've maybe been in the storm, be that actual or figurative, in terms of where you thought this is a very bad situation, and how did you manage that? How did you manage yourself, and how did you move beyond that?
There was a particular time that stands out because I was actually in a storm. I was crewing on a rather interesting. I'd left London and I wanted to do something completely different, and I'd crewed on board a ship, 25-meter, 84-foot ship called the research vessel Heraclitus, and handmade in the 1970s out of ferro cement, junk rig, three masts, bit of a pirate ship basically. Amazing. Does sort of ecosystem based projects around the world. It's been to six of the it's been to six of the seas, the world's oceans. They've done stuff to do with the coral reef, to do with the Amazon, to do with whales in Antarctica. Anyway, amazing history. So we were in the Mediterranean. We were actually anchored off Spain, and just so hot. I got up on deck, and there was a storm on the horizon, massive storm on the horizon. It was so far away, I couldn't even hear it. So I watched it. It was coming closer, and the pulse was going up a bit, and then it moved away, and I thought, we're good. Put it in the logbook, went down to try and get some sleep, and then suddenly it's like, all hands on deck. I think probably an hour had passed, but it felt like 5 minutes. All hands on deck, and the storm was right on top of us, and it was, heavy shit, but tossing us around. And we were underprepared. We'd actually, which is probably one of the first lessons, is we'd got complacent about being prepared for what if a storm hits. So everyone's to their sort of action stations type thing. But one of the things I had to do was jump into the metal dinghy, which was alongside. Normally it should have been astern, and it should have had two lines on it, and it had one. So I had to put this other line on it, and being tossed around. I'm only wearing boxers and a vest or something, and I'm trying to tie a knot tie a bowline in the dark, lit only by the lightning that's going on overhead,
Yes.
and sort of, sort of mentally trying to remember how to tie a knot.
How this thing goes. As a sailor myself, I know exactly what trying to tie that particular knot in the dark. It's not easy.
Ah,
Even though your muscle memory should help you, it's not easy.
exactly. And I did have enough awareness to go, just calm, just breathe, just calm down like this. And then,
Mm.
so I was trying to do that and just go, just focus, just do one thing, just do one thing and do it well.
Mm.
So I got it, I did it. And then I stood back up to climb back up the ladder on board. And in that moment, I looked up. So you got this black hulled boat with these three metal masts underneath these swirling clouds with the lightning going sideways, backwards and forwards, looking for somewhere to land. And I suddenly go, oh shit. It's like I'm in a metal dinghy, barefoot metal dinghy, next to a ferro cement ship with three metal masts. I'm not in a good place here. But then it was also in that this has all happened, in seconds. I suddenly was, I don't know, I think it was the awe of nature that made me feel minuscule. I've had this before in other experiences like glacier
Mm.
hiking and things where I just felt minuscule and insignificant. And in that same moment, I felt connected. I mean, talk about Mojo. It
Mm.
was like 11 out of 10. It was because suddenly, that electromagnetism, it's just coursing through your body. You could probably say there was adrenaline and all these other things going on as well.
Yeah.
I felt so alive. It was, even though I was terrified.
Well, I find that's fascinating because in that moment of what you said, terrified, that you think your fear system would be ratcheted all the way up as high as it can possibly go at that point, but somehow you'll have the ability to look in awe at nature. It's incredible.
So I think this is what nature can do for us, is that so I come back to the top, when we're actually plugged into our own essential nature as part of everything else. Because what happened, what I actually experienced was calm. It was suddenly everything went calm and everything went quiet and everything went slow. A friend of mine he said he's had this when he's from the military. He's been in a firefight, and he said it was horrific. But there was this moment where everything was in slow motion as well. And I think what happens, or shall we say, on reflection of my experience, we become fully present. And I think when we're fully present, there's literally only this moment. And with that that's in going into the eye of the storm. Suddenly you're not being swirled around. You're actually standing in the center. You're standing in the stillness of everything that's going on around. And I think, again, this is where there can be cohesion that comes from apparent chaos. Is, well, where am I? What's happening? What's the one thing I can do next?
Your choices are massively limited, and that's a good thing. That sounds like it's a survival instinct that's happening. I can only think about this thing. I can only do one thing, and that's the one thing that's going to help me in this scenario.
What I would say is combined with perspective. So it's not that threat of there's this one thing and nothing else. It's like there's this one thing, and it's part of everything else. For me, it's the combination of perspective and one next thing, and that's what happened. I was really calm. I just climbed the ladder, went round to see the rest of the crew one at a time. Some were panicking, some were struggling, and some were fine, but went round and just did what I could to encourage and reassure and perhaps help out whatever was going on with everyone else. And late, wasn't thinking about it, right? But later, what people said to me is, "How were you so calm?" And I really think there's an allowing. So weirdly, because going back to control, is like when we allow things to be what they are, then we suddenly get a greater sense of control for what we can do and what we can't.
Something in that allowing, there's, I know for me, is an acceptance perhaps of this. Well, this is the situation I'm in.
Yeah.
There's no pretending I'm not here, because when bad stuff happens, when shit happens, whether it's literally in a storm like that or a scenario we're in right now, you'd probably prefer to be somewhere else. But I think you have to accept this is where I am, and I do need to. You needed to. I need to get off this boat, the tender, onto the main
Yeah.
boat, and I need to help some people out.
Yeah. And there were some decisions that needed to be made. I mean, the metaphor continues because some stuff we had to cut loose. Some stuff we had to tie down because it was essential and we needed it. And some stuff we had to cut loose because it was causing more damage than it was worth. Yeah. So I think that's also interesting for these times. It's like, what is essential?
Yes.
What are we holding on? What are we holding on to that's non-essential, but is flapping us around and causing damage? Yeah.
But coming back to where we are now, and I love this sense of what is essential in life. How do you help people or coach them, guide them to understanding what is most essential?
Ultimately, I think that's for what each of us is doing our best to discover and remember. So for me, it's about creating a space of non-judgment where people feel safe to explore that, and they feel safe to let go the stuff that's maybe needs to let go, and let surface what's actually true and important and essential for them. I think the first bit is to, again, what do I do? The first thing for me is to acknowledge where I am, what is, and how I'm feeling. As soon as I acknowledge how I'm feeling, it starts to, it's like it feels recognized, and then it starts to move. I mean, emotion is energy in motion. I kind of think emotions want to move, they want to express themselves, and the least healthy thing I can do is try and deny them or bottle them or push them around with my ego, because actually they're just wanting to find an outlet. They're wanting to find expression. So yeah, I've had that for myself where I used to really bottle up anger because I judged myself. I judged people who were angry, I guess, and I was trying very hard to be a good boy in my life. And soon as it still comes back from time to time, but if I don't judge the anger and find a healthy outlet for it, and if I rip up the good boy script and go, I'm doing my best, then the things that have been bottling up start to move. So if I can create that space of allowing, and it's okay and it's normal for others, that's the first bit. And then afterwards, it's actually quite joyful. It's when you get into what do you really want to do? What are you passionate about? What did you love when you were a kid? What makes you? There's a lovely quote that stays with me that is from Howard Thurman. His name is, and it was, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you feel alive, and do that. What the world needs is people who feel alive."
Amen to that, especially right now. Richard, what a wonderful conversation. I often talk about wisdom. Well, all my guests have amazing wisdom. I think your worldly wisdom has just really come through and has given me that a level of calm, and hopefully other listeners will feel that as well. So thank you very much. I can't let you go before I just ask you my closing question. And we talked a bit about what you're doing quite regularly, but what are your if they're daily or frequent practices that help you with your mojo, going back to that sense of that when you feel electric, when you feel that magnetism going on, what else are you doing?
One thing that really honestly changed my life when I got into self-development was doing something for me first thing in the day. So it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a walk in nature. It could be physical exercise. It could be meditation. It could be reading something. It could be having breakfast. But it's done with the intention of, this is for me, because I was sort of jamming myself into the other end of the day, and then that time got squeezed, and then sometimes it didn't happen. So by saying to myself at the beginning of the day, whatever I do first is going to be nurturing, sets the tone. Another one is I got this. This is brilliant. I got this off a YouTube clip with Mel Robbins, and it helped her get out of depression. And it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, action. Okay. This is brilliant. If you're procrastinating on something, or if at the other end you're distracting yourself on something and you want to focus on that one thing, go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then do it and start. The reason that works is our thinking brain kicks in after 6 seconds. Our instincts and our intuition know what to do in that first, already know what to do. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's a countdown. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Prepares your system for action, and it does it before the thinking mind kicks in.
Oh, because is it the thinking mind could lead you to put a block in place and stop you doing that thing?
It'll talk you out of it. The coiled thoughts kick in, and the habits, and but I haven't got enough time. The yes buts, the bodyguards. I'll do it later. I'm not sure I can. I don't know how to get started. Who should I speak to? But whatever the thinking bit that kicks in, right?
Yeah.
All the shoulds, all the reasons why not to. So that's one, and then.
Great.
Start and finish would be gratitude and compassion. I find that gratitude can melt anything. And, sometimes love is a bit too much of a step too far to go. I know when I've had, depression in my life, it was too much to say, be kind to myself. It was too much at that time because I didn't think I was worth being kind to. But if I go gratitude, that starts to melt things. That starts to move things, and you start to feel it. I can feel it now in my heart. I'm grateful for this moment. I'm grateful for this podcast and the work you're doing. I think it's fabulous.
Well, Richard, same back to you. I mean, just a wonderful, wonderful episode, great conversation, and I'm immensely full of gratitude for how you've made me feel. And I just know everyone else listening is going to feel exactly the same. Definitely that sense of calm, but also that the model that you've taken us through, it's immensely useful, practical, and thank you so much for joining the Mojo podcast today.
Richard, thank you. My Mojo is really dialed up now, so I'm going to go and stand outside and put my rocky arms in the air and go, yes.
That is a wonderful reaction to being a guest on the podcast. So Richard Bellars, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, all the best.
Well, I hope you'll agree it was well worth hanging on right until the end of the episode. I loved that conversation and didn't really want it to end. Indeed, after I pressed stop when we were talking, Richard and I carried on for another 40 minutes. So I really should have carried on recording and done another episode. But there you are, I'm always learning in this podcast game. I think my takeouts from this one could run to about 20 minutes, and you've already been here a while. I know you'll take out really useful learning from this. But if you do one thing, do click on the link I include in the show notes on the emotional regulatory system work. I think it's really interesting and very, very applicable. Richard works with and is very passionate about Help for Heroes. They're a brilliant charity and always looking for volunteers to support and mentor veterans. I include a link to them in the show notes too. And you also find links in the show notes for Richard's website where you can find more of his insightful writing. Okay, thank you so much for listening. It means a lot to me, and if these episodes are helping you, please do help me to find more listeners to the show. So if you could share an episode link with some friends, subscribe, as I say, for new episodes every week, leave a 5-star rating, and help soothe me by writing that all-important review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, I hope your mojo continues to flow.